Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Captain Novolin, brought to us by Rhea Systems and Sculptured Software. Captain Novolin is a diabetic educational game, where you play as Captain Novolin, who must save the mayor, who is of course also diabetic, from the evil Blubberman and his evil forces of killer donuts and sodas. You must collect food items along the way to manage out your blood sugar levels. Going too high or too low will cause you to lose a life. And the game does its absolute best to try to educate kids dealing with diabetes. However, the problem with the game is its hit detection and very poor combat just lead to a bad experience. When you start the game, you can pick what language you want to play in, and then you're also given the opportunity to put in a code that your doctor would have given you to better match up your blood sugar levels, I'm sure, with the character in the game to give you a more personal experience. You're then told what the game exactly is, and once we see that, and the warning about insulin, we jump into the main story, where we find out aliens have landed, kidnapped the mayor, and the only person who can save him is Captain Novolin. If you're wondering why he's called Captain Novolin, it's based on the Novolin brand of insulin. After the introductory story, we're met with our first doctor screen. The doctor will give you random blood sugar and diabetes advice throughout, and then you'll have to match up your blood glucose level. This is where you'll find out whether or not you've had too much food or not enough food. Basically, as if you're in the green area, you're safe. If you're in the red, you need to lay back on eating some of the food in the levels, and if you're in the blue, you may need to eat a little bit more. You have to keep your eye on this in between levels so that you don't lose a life midway through a stage. Then we jump into the levels itself. You'll find random food and other little informational things laying around the game. As far as the combat goes in the game, you'll actually jump on enemies and hold down on the D-pad in order to stomp down on them. When it comes to the combat though, the hit detection is quite awful, and sometimes you'll find yourself hitting an enemy while holding down, when honestly it makes no sense for you to have been able to make contact. You'll also have opportunities and instances where you'll end up getting hit by the enemy even though it clearly looks like you would have safely landed on top of them for the double leg stomp. At the end of each level, the time will kind of rack up a little bit, and then you will go to another screen where you'll get to match up your blood glucose level again, and then a little bit of information on what you should and shouldn't eat during the course of the next part of the level, and then jump into the stage itself. There's only a handful of stages in the game, and easily the most tricky thing about this title is not really dealing with the enemies, but managing that food level and making sure your blood sugar is at a good point at all times. At certain points in the levels, you'll hit a spot where you'll automatically move the time ahead, get some bonus points. This is your checkpoints. Sometimes the checkpoints are really right near the very end of a level, so they're kind of really odd placement. I don't think it really matters on the dosage you end up giving yourself how much that really ends up affecting your character. Throughout the game, there are also random citizens that you can talk to that will give you a little bit of random dialogue, most of which is pretty inane and not really worth your time, but they are at least funny kind of to look at. The third level of the game is the first of two boat levels, where you control Captain Novolin as he's cruising along a lake on his way to the next area. Enemies during this stage are different than the ones on land, with a few enemies being in both. The giant sundaes moving along are some of the bigger enemies, and the worst are definitely the Twizzler-like enemies that come flying and twirling in, as well as the bubblegum enemies. In the first level, they're pretty easy to deal with, but in the second lake level, they'll be able to spit bubblegum at you, and they're very annoying. I really find it humorous that the items for the food throughout the lake levels is actually rowing in a little boat or flying overhead. If your blood sugar is too low, as you can notice here, and I need to eat some food, my character has a very funny expression on his face when I'm standing still. Thankfully, this level contains enough food, though, that I'll be able to maintain my life without having to worry about going down as long as I pick up all the food items. While there actually is a decent amount of enemies, I have to admit, throughout the game, since you're able to pretty much stomp on their heads quite easily, most aren't really a threat. Sometimes you may accidentally run into an enemy like the granola guys because they end up seeing you and then running really quickly towards the screen, or if you bounce off one enemy and go too high and land into one of the Twizzler-like enemies. At the end of this stage is the end of day 1. We will see all the food items we ate during the course of the day, and then we'll do the norms before moving on to the second lake stage and our second breakfast level. This level is very similar to the first lake level, except, like I said, the bubblegum wrappers will now spit bubblegum at you. It's a little bit tricky, though, to dodge these guys, and landing directly on their head, sometimes if they spit just at the right moment, even if you land on them, they'll still hit you with the bubble that they were currently blowing. Well, I have to say that the graphics aren't really that bad in Captain Novolin. The sprites are actually quite large and nice looking, especially for, killer sodas and donuts and cookies. However, because of this, too many enemies on screen will cause the game to chug, making it pretty difficult to actually jump up into the air and time your hits correctly. If you're able to have your blood level in the green zone after a stage, you will net yourself some bonus points. Keep doing this and you'll get more and more bonus points. We have 3 levels left, and the next 2 are on the mountain area. We can meet with Ranger Betty at the beginning of this stage for some meaningless conversation before going into the stage. Enemies are the same that we've been dealing with throughout the other levels. The terrain, though, is a little bit different in this stage, and this is the only levels with pits in them that we can fall down, and you'll lose a life if you fall down one of these pits. Probably the only really tricky part as far as platforming goes throughout this game. The most annoying enemies throughout these levels that we haven't really dealt with are the ice cream cones that like to throw chunks of ice cream at you, and just like the bubblegum guys, because they can throw a distance, they are annoying. However, since they're not constantly moving towards you, they're just stagnant and staying still, it's a little bit easier to deal with them, I feel. At the beginning of the next level, you can meet with another one of the citizens who gets to show you his diabetes emergency card. After that thrilling cutscene, we continue along our mountain journey. This is the second to last level of the game. Overall, not really any more difficult than the level we just dealt with. You want to keep an eye on that food level, though, because going to the last stage, you want to make sure that you have at least a decent blood sugar level, due to there not being very many food items at all during the very final stage. I always find the enemy placements in some of these levels also to be funny. Some enemies, especially during the mountain stages, appear right next to a cliff and end up just walking right off the cliff. When we make it to the end of the level, though, you'll see a spaceship, rack up our score, and it's time for the final stage of Captain Novolin. I know you can't wait to see it. At the beginning of the final level, I always end up walking into the electrical panel that is on the ground. There's a few of these electricity running panels throughout, and if you step on them, of course, you'll lose health. Now, one thing I really haven't explained at all is your health. In the upper right corner, you'll notice the faces of Captain Novolin, and when you take damage, a piece of that face will disappear. Once it's all disappeared, you'll lose a life, you have 3 lives, and once you run out, you will game over. The final level, really not any more tricky than the rest, though they like to put a bunch of the bouncing enemies all together, and this can be hard to hit multiples at a time. For the final boss of the game, walk forward to this lever, duck down next to it, and it'll send 3 electrical beams at the boss. Once it's been hit 3 times, jump over and walk over and save Mayor Gooden. Here you'll be asked a random diabetes question. These are random sometimes, but either way, no matter which answer you end up picking, I think you only get really some bonus points for picking the right one, and then you'll see your Day 2 logbook, followed by the one-screen ending to the game, where you get to shake Mayor Gooden's hand, have your congratulations and your final score at the bottom of the screen as the spaceship blasts away, never to be seen again, because of course there was no sequels. After this, you'll see a credit sequence. You can see the few people that worked on the game. And after this, you can hit the button and start the game all over again. But with that, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.